All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Stark After Dark. I'm your host, Jordan Clark, and today I am joined by the wonderfully talented illustrator, cartoonist, and writer Ezra Clayton Daniels. He's the author and illustrator of Upgrade Soul, which is available everywhere now, bookstores, comic book shops, out from Lion Forge. Say hello to everybody.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ezra. It's super exciting to be here.
Yeah, so Uh, it's I think what I want to do. I mean, we're gonna get into some spoilery stuff about the book, just because I don't know if you can talk in too much detail about a lot of the ideas and things going on here without giving a few things away. But I don't want to give everything away because I want people to go get the book and read it and enjoy it with fresh eyes.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
but a lot of big things going on for you. Obviously, you're getting ready to go out on a book tour. You're going to be around, seeing the people, promoting the book. And there's also, I just read that you optioned the book off, so there's possible movie adaptation coming
Hmm.
up in the future. So congratulations on that. That's exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, how's everything been going with for you? Because it's been a lot of stuff happening in a short amount of time. So
Yeah, it's been pretty crazy. So Upgrade Soul just came out in September, and I've been working on it in various forms for about 15 years. So it's been this thing that kind of has existed in one form or another, kind of on the periphery of comics consciousness. And I finally put it out as a book. And well, I can back up a little bit. So as soon as I finished the comic, I made a PDF and sent that PDF off to the Dwayne McDuffie Award submissions because it happened to be coinciding with just around the time that I finished the book. So I sent
right.
the PDF off, and shockingly, I was shortlisted for the I made the finals, and then I won the award. And it was like this crazy thing. I'd never won anything before. I've been making comics in pretty much total obscurity for my entire life, just self-publishing zines and mini comics and like short digital print runs of stuff. And so I won this award, went to the ceremony. It was officiated by Phil Lamar, the
Nice.
amazing, incredible, super talented voice actor. I was like super starstruck. I couldn't believe what was happening. And this guy, William Watkins, was one of the judges on the panel. And so we were walking out to dinner after the ceremony. And he said that my life was about to change after winning this award. And I was like, that would be awesome. I would love that. But I was just trying not to get my hopes up for
Right.
anything. I was like, yeah, that'd be great. That's super cool. But I'm just gonna, you know, focus on keeping my head down and continuing to make comics.
Hmm.
But then over the course of the next year and a half, like I got a publisher. I finished this other book, Bottom Feeders, with Ben Passmore. We got a publisher for that one. I'm pitching a bunch of other projects. Bottom Feeders and Upgrade Soul are both optioned for film. So both of those are going to be hopefully in development. But yeah, this has been like an insane whirlwind. Oh, and then well, I'm not going to say anything about that. Actually, yeah,
Ooh.
I'm going to stop
Ooh.
that. I got excited because I got an email today about something. But
Okay.
if y'all want to know what's coming down the pipeline, you're going to have to follow me on social media or something.
Yeah. Well, that's and it's crazy because we were talking before we went on air that this is a project that you'd been working on in various forms for a long time, like 15 years.
Hmm.
And how does it feel to work on something for that long? And like you were saying, kind of underappreciated, or nobody's really paying attention to what you're
I mean,
doing.
I didn't say all that, but
Well,
maybe it's in the subtext.
but you know how I mean. I think a lot of people who create kind of know the feeling of. I mean, you don't even necessarily feel like you're owed anything, or people are supposed to be watching your every move, but you're dedicating yourself to something, and you're invested in it, and
Yeah.
you're feeling this level of like I I'm not going to put it on you, but I would say, for me, sometimes there's a level of anxiety of, there's a lot of time and effort that I'm personally putting and investing into this thing.
Right.
Is it worth it? Is it something that's going to, again, depending on what your level idea of success is, whether it's financial, whether it's just, personally in terms of creative endeavors, things like that, like, is this going to be worth all this time and effort being put into it? And again, 15 years is like, that's not
Yeah.
that's it's not like you were just, oh, like, I did this thing last year and like I really
Yeah.
hope people like it. It's like, man, that's like, you know obviously, was it 15 years like nonstop or 15 years kind of on and off,
Yeah, and it
putting it
definitely,
down,
yeah.
coming back?
Yeah. Well, it definitely wasn't 15 years nonstop. And I was working on several other projects at the same time too. So I'd written a bunch of scripts, I'd done some other short comics and, kept the day job. I was doing graphic design and illustration and, all kinds of other creative projects too during that 15 years. So if I had spent 15 years full-time work on Upgrade Soul, that would be, I don't know if I could say that I would feel proud. I mean, I'd be proud, but like, was it worth it? The question is,
Right.
was it worth it? Yeah, the question is, the answer is definitely that it was worth it. But I've been doing this for a long time. Like I said, I'm almost 40. This is my first published book, and I've been rejected enough times in the industry to have, a pretty, I think, level-headed expectation for success, and also just not to have any ideas for what success means beyond my personal satisfaction with the work. So
Right.
I finished it. I got the book done exactly the way I wanted to do it. I was lucky enough to find a publisher in Lineforge that just like took it as it was and let me express myself the way I wanted to. And now the book is out in the world. And if people like it, that's awesome. If I get rich, I will finally get to challenge myself to see if I can hold by my guns and be an altruistic person, even with wealth and power. But if not, like I said, I got it out and I'm happy with it.
Right. Well, that, and I think that's the happy ending to the whole thing is that, you come out on the other side and you're like, I did that. I feel like the
Yeah,
hardest thing about any creative endeavor is really just finishing a thing,
right, totally.
and having it finished. But having it, I mean, you can talk a little bit about it. I really enjoyed the book, obviously, but have you been getting a good reception back? You wanted the Dwayne McDuffie award for
Yeah,
diversity for it, so I feel like that's a good start in terms of
yeah.
people recognizing the work. But have you got a chance to talk with people about it and kind of get some feedback from people?
Yeah, totally. It's a weird thing. So I was working on the book for a long time, and I pitched it around to all the publishers every couple of years when I would reach a milestone. So like when I finished the first act, I would put it together as like a 100-page trade paperback and send it off to all the publishers to see if anybody wanted to put it out. And nobody ever wanted to touch it.
Hmm.
And I think the reason is that it's really a niche story. And I think understandably, a lot of people are like, this is really weird, this is really dark, and I don't know if a lot of people are is going to find a big audience. I think a lot of it too had to do with the racial aspect. So it had something to do with racism and ageism, I think, because the
Hmm.
story is centered on an elderly mixed race couple. And I think a lot of editors would look at that and just be like, there's not going to be an audience for this. And I
Right.
think they said that over and over and over again until the tide started to change a little bit. And then especially when like Get Out came out, suddenly
Right.
everybody, all the gatekeepers are like, oh, there's an audience for this kind of stuff. So let's try to put this out. So I think, and luckily, Lionforge is, organically committed to that mission. So that wasn't really an issue for them, but they happened to find the footing at the same time as this stuff started to change. So it just happened to be kind of like a great coincidence that we found each other at the same time. But to answer your question, what has the response been? Everybody who's gotten the book and read the book, the response has been phenomenal. But I think it's one of those books that's such a niche audience and it's kind of a hard sell and it's a bit of a heady topic that I think it's going to
Yeah.
take people a little bit of time to get through it. So I'm expecting it to be more of like a slow burn response.
And let's talk a little bit about a lot of the subject matter and this headiness, these ideas behind it. Especially in relation to, again, this is a podcast about love and romance, and I feel like this is a book that tackles it from a different perspective because, like you said before, it's about an elderly couple. So we're getting, this couple that has been together for 40 years,
Hmm.
40-year anniversary, and it's interesting because so often in media what we see is not just younger couples, but couples going through all kinds of drama and whatnot. That's really what sells in regards to romance. And there's drama in this book in regards to romance, but initially when we meet this couple, they are a happy couple. I mean, they've made it a long distance. I feel like 40 is a milestone that a lot of people would like to reach just in terms of marriage and finding
Hmm.
somebody. And one of the things that I really liked that you did is very early on, you feel like this is a couple that's been together for that amount of time, and you feel that these are people who love and know each other in a way that is very intimate and subtle. Like
Hmm.
with younger romance, there's obviously more like physical intimacy, but there's still, you're still trying to figure that other person out and kind of, get their daily routines and their ticks. But these are people who, you've been with this person so long, it's just like, all right, yeah, they fell asleep on the couch again. I'm just gonna, cover them up
Hmm.
with a blanket, or, okay, like, they have the TV way up, or they have the captions always on, or and this it just kind of becomes part of your daily routine in your life. And
Yeah.
another big part of the book is identity and the concept of identity. And I feel like these are two people, again, who've been together so long that when you're with somebody for that length of time, they become part of your identity, become part of
Hmm.
who you are. So how did you go about creating these two characters and creating this relationship that they had?
Yeah, the characters are based specifically on my grandparents, Barb and Leon, and kind of a little bit the way they look, but certainly in what their relationship is like. And so one thing I wanted to portray with their relationship was to show that comfort, not and also I didn't want this elderly couple to be like, oh, they're just like super cute old people. Like I feel like that's super condescending,
Yeah.
obviously, and I didn't want to go down that path. So they're complicated people and their relationship is complicated. And like my grandparents are my two favorite people on the planet, and I spent a lot of time with them. My grandfather died unfortunately a couple years ago before I could finish the book,
Hmm.
but he was my best friend. I would hang out with them every time I'd go back to my hometown, and just like, you know, their relationship became so embedded in just like my understanding of what long-term love looked like, that it wasn't even necessarily a matter of like research. It was just like, this is what it is, and
Right.
this is what I'm drawing from. And one thing I found really interesting about their relationship was like, obviously they loved each other, but they'd also been through a lot together, and they'd been through a lot of hard times together, where the love was, not 100%
Hmm.
there sometimes. And I think they'd found ways to snipe at each other that I thought was really interesting, that like you only would pick up on if you were with them for a long time and if they
Right.
got comfortable enough around you. And especially like if they thought no one was listening. And so like little things like that were really interesting to me, and I really wanted to work that into the characters. So those two characters are totally an homage to my grandparents.
And we're gonna get into a little bit of spoilery territory here, because what happens is they, for their 40th anniversary, they decide that they're gonna undergo this procedure, which will hopefully, if it all works out, which it's a science fiction book, so it's not gonna work out the way that you think it is. But they're going to be turned into the ideal versions of themselves, their best selves. And obviously that doesn't happen. But what they end up with is physical clones of their best selves, their ideal selves. But physically, they're not ideal. Physically, they are kind of these deformed people who are, they're smaller, they don't really have all the features that you would recognize in a human being. But their aptitude is much different. They're
Mhm.
smarter, they're stronger, they can do a lot more things. um and what we kind of see is, I think a lot of people's ideas of, oh, if you were just to clone somebody, you would get that exact copy, that exact replica. And so if you were to clone, these two people who were in love, well, obviously they would be in love when they came out, when they were fully cloned. But what we get is a different kind of relationship. And I was really interested in that too, and how you went about crafting the relationship between the two clones, and kind of how it mirrored in some ways, but it was also just kind of almost a dark mirror kind of
Mhm.
of the initial relationship.
Yeah, so the thing, I think the central theme of the book is like you said, it's all about identity. And I wanted to explore how much of our identity is tied up with the way we look, and also like what our capabilities are, and the things that we remember and forget,
Hmm.
uh, whether it's intentional or unintentional. So one of the things about the clones is that they have, not only are they stronger and faster and smarter, and healthier, but they also have total recall memory of everything that's ever happened in their lives. So I think there's something about like relationships where you sometimes, like, when things are good, you forget the things that were bad.
Right.
And I think that's kind of crucial for being happy in a relationship, because not, obviously every relationship has ups and downs, but like if you dwell on the bad things, then that's what kind of eats away at a relationship. So you kind of have to like selectively forget things, not only things that the other person has done or arguments you've had or whatever, but just traumas that you've been through
Hmm.
and that you have to kind of put behind you in order to move on. So when the clones are created, they like suddenly, it's like they've opened up the refrigerator and everything that they've ever eaten is like
Right.
stuffed in there, and suddenly they have to reconcile with everything. And that makes them different people, because things that they've like suppressed for 40 years are suddenly back as if it happened 5 minutes ago. Um, and so then the clones have to decide how that changes the way they interact with each other, because they're suddenly just completely different people in so, like, in every way.
And it's interesting too because again, talking about just physical identity, the way that people look. There's another subplot in here in which one of the clones falls in love with another person who has physical deformities, and I was really intrigued by that as well because, again, like you were saying, typical love story. If you were to pitch it to a publisher or studio, or even just a typical uh, science fiction story, if you were to pitch it to a studio or a publisher, and those were the two main characters, that's not really
Right.
something that they're necessarily looking at and saying, oh, that's marketable. Like, that's something that
Right.
I think people will look at. But what you find again is that their relationship is intricate and nuanced in a way that it's not just like, oh, we both have this one thing in common, therefore we should be together. It's
Hmm.
this one thing that we have in common has linked us together, but we're finding all these other things, all these other desires and wants, and it's a complicated relationship because it is somewhat manipulative in a
Hmm.
way. um how did you go about crafting that particular relationship?
Oh man, that was a tough one. That was and that so I wrote the first draft of the script probably about 10 years ago, and that's when I started drawing the book. Um, and then as I was going through the book and becoming a better person and becoming more well read and more traveled and more worldly, I kept on going back and fine tuning some of the things and smoothing some things out that I had written, years prior, that just like weren't very, um, like, I don't know what the word is, but they just like weren't as nuanced as they should be. They weren't like a
Yeah.
nuanced portrayal of like these people's identities and their agency and their hopes and dreams. So the last act in the first draft admittedly used that character that you mentioned as kind of a plot device. Like, she wasn't a fully formed person with her own desires.
Hmm.
Um, and I just didn't see it, honestly. I mean, like, I was in my mid 20s. I just wasn't in that headspace to see that. And I became, just a better person over the years. And so when I got to that part in the script, I was just like, that's not going to work. I got to
Yeah.
like go back to the drawing board on this whole last act and flesh this thing out. And so, like, over the past probably like 3 or 4 years, I went back and rewrote that and spent a ton of time just trying to work it out, talking to people, doing research, and trying to make sure that this character was well formed. And so that the last act of the book is the thing that it's so fresh, because it's the thing that I wrote most recently. Like, this book has been in my life for a really long time, but that last act has only been in my life for a few years. So
Hmm.
that's the one that I'm like the most sensitive about, or like
Yeah.
worried that it's like not going to hit right, because it's so fresh. Because all the rest of it I've sat with for so many years. I'm like, okay, that works, like, or whatever. Like, I know what works and what doesn't work with the old
Yeah.
stuff. But so yeah, it was very hard, and I'm really nervous about how it's gonna come off. But I was really happy with the way it turned out when I delivered it, and I hope other people find it authentic feeling.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it, and I felt like it did kind of give, uh, not only a turn to the book, but a turn to that character. And when certain things start to become revealed, and you kind of learn, um, about, not necessarily just like individual plans that everybody has, but about the way that this relationship, kind of has transformed over the course of, a very short period of time, because it's
Hmm.
the whole book doesn't take place longer than, would you say, a month, 2 months,
Yeah,
something like that.
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all these people who are kind of, forced into the situation, to be together, to live together, to coexist together, and things kind of move very quickly, and
Hmm.
it could have been a thing where, yeah, if they had just kind of met and fell in love and that was it, it could have been like, well, all right, like, I guess, yeah, that's probably could happen, but the way that everything kind of plays out, it does feel very, very real and very nuanced and believable in a way that you can see it definitely happening that way. So I think the next thing I do want to talk about is, again, just in terms of the diversity of the book. It's a book that uh, has a wide range of characters from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of body types, and just it's got a very interesting look to it as well from your art style. What was it like designing all of these characters? And obviously, are the main characters based like physically on your grandparents? Or you try to draw them in a similar way to them, or is it mostly just personality based?
It's mostly personality based, although my grandpa does have a big, or did have a big white beard. Um, so when my grandma saw the cover of one of the short run books that I put out, she immediately recognized my grandpa, even though it's based on my white grandparents, and Hank in the book is black. She still recognized
All right.
that. So there's some similarities there. But yeah, the diversity of the book was a thing that I didn't really think about when I started doing these character designs. It just, I mean, I guess it was in the back of my mind, but I just also wanted to feel like reality. And I think that obviously that is reality, that like diversity is everywhere.
Hmm.
And I think the way I look at it is that like people of color exist in every corner of the world, right? So if you're making a story, no matter where it's set, and if there's no people of color, then that's a choice that you're making,
Right.
and it's either a choice that you're making out of fear because you don't want to upset anybody, or like it's a wish fulfillment. You wish these people weren't here. But it's a choice. So like if you see a story and there's no people of color or no diversity in body type or age or ability, that's intentional.
Right.
And so I think it's like it's more of a choice to do something like that than it is to as than it is a choice to do something that has like a natural diversity, because it's just a reflection of reality. So yeah, I guess I didn't really think about it too much in the early stages. Um, yeah, I guess I don't have anything else to say about that. Did I answer the question? Okay.
Well, with the clones too, though, obviously they don't look anything like their human counterparts. Also, I guess just for reference, I mean, what did you name them? Because I mean, would you consider them human, or would you consider them something else?
Yeah, they're definitely human.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I could talk a little bit about the design of the character. So one of the things I was doing during this 15 years while I was working on this thing off and on was I was doing medical and technical illustrations for high stakes court cases. So I was
Okay.
doing like charts and graphs and illustrations and animations for like big pharma patent disputes and police murder cases, and I was doing
Right.
maps for like really crazy stuff. And the whole thing about that kind of work is clarity of information.
Hmm.
So the style is intended to be as clear as possible. Like I never wanted anyone to be reading this book and to be confused as to where they were in a room, for instance. This is
Right.
getting a little bit like process technical, but like
I
for
love it. Go
instance,
for it.
when you like that classic book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. One
Right.
of the things they say about blocking shots and shot composition is that like every panel needs to be super dynamic. So like if it's a conversation between, I think the example they used in the book was between J. Jonah Jameson and Peter Parker, where like
Hmm.
every time someone says something, it's like the camera is in a different corner of the room, or like under the desk, or like behind someone, between someone's leg. So you never have a static sense of where you are in the room. And from panel to
Right.
panel, it's like I have no idea where these people are, what's going on. And so I didn't want anybody to ever have to be like to stop and remove themselves from the narrative to figure out technical stuff that they shouldn't have to think about when they're
Right.
consuming a story. Like, I'm not making a story to make you think about where you are in a room. Like,
Right.
that's not the goal of the story. So everything is like really all about clarity, and I didn't want to use any excessive rendering. So there's no hatching or um, even like gradient tones. It's all very flat, kind of has like an animation feel,
Hmm.
like an animation cell kind of feel. So that's where I was coming from with that. I didn't want to rely on any artistic tricks to create tension or like horror. I wanted everything to be entirely character based and situation based. So like I didn't want to have any scenes where like you open the door and you're in a dark room and you're scared because it's
Right.
dark. Like I didn't want to have anything like that. So that's kind of where that came from. And the design of the clones came from one of the cases I feel like I worked on a lot of cases when I was doing trial stuff that involved babies, like babies and fetuses, and like the development of fetuses in the womb. And so I'd drawn a lot of fetuses for some reason. So like I knew what that looked like, and I wanted the clones to look like something that felt kind of familiar, but also alien and kind of horrific, but also really appealing and kind of cute. So I based them
Yeah.
on like 10th week fetuses. So they look pretty, like if you Google like what a 10th week fetus looks like, it looks pretty much like the clones in the book. So I wanted to just take that form and enlarge it to be the size of like a small adult.
Yeah.
And so that's why they look the way they look.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of Cronenberg kind of body horror going
Yeah,
on when
absolutely.
you
He's
see
a
them for
huge
the first
influence.
time. Yeah, because it's kind of like there's it could have been obviously a more grotesque kind of look, but I think there's uh I think the word that's coming to my mind is softness to them, to their
Yeah,
design
totally. Yeah.
that makes them they're human. There's
hmm
definitely like a a sympathetic view that you take of them definitely as they continue to grow and evolve. And also, again, just the more that you think about them as fetuses, they're childlike in some ways. And I mean, in the beginning, they're learning to talk again, they're learning to walk again, they're learning to kind of do a lot of the things that children do, but very quickly they kind of surpass that level and then
hmm
surpass that of the originals in a lot of ways. um Another thing I wanted to talk about um is really just how uh throughout the book, again, the idea of identity um plays a big role in the love story. And that initially the original couple, Hank and Molly, are kind of, it's again, like you're saying, like it's not necessarily there at a point in their relationship where like, oh, like it's over, but they're reaching the point where it is maybe over life-wise. I mean, that's a little morbid,
hmm
but it's kind of like they're looking at the end here and they're saying, man, like I don't know if I want to be around without you. I don't know. But it's a possibility, it's a reality that like, one of us might go
hmm
soon, and then it's just you. And that's a very real fear that a lot of elderly couples go through, just in terms of having to kind of think about those arrangements and things that it might be to kind of lose somebody. But then their whole arc kind of takes a turn where um even though it's not the ideal way that this would have turned out, they kind of grow even closer in a way by the end of the story. And that they've been through this traumatic event, but it's kind of just really cemented their relationship even more than it was when it started.
hmm
Was that I'm assuming that's obviously intentional, but like, how did you go about trying to write that arc in terms of their love story?
Yeah, that was very intentional, and I don't know how spoiler I want to get. I won't go into specifics, but basically by the end of the story, I wanted things to end up exactly the way the main characters wanted things to end up
Yeah.
from the beginning of the book, but just a very bittersweet and twisted version of that with lots of loss that happened along the way. So like the final shot is them with everything they ever wanted, but it's just like what did we lose to get here? So yeah, and there is some stuff about trauma in the book that I don't really get too into. There's some stuff that's kind of hinted at that there was, like I said, there's trauma in this couple's history that they'd suppressed and that it was dredged up again by going through this process. And I
Right.
hint at it. I don't get too much into it. Um, and I guess to be honest, I didn't really think that much about the corollary between that trauma kind of separating them and the trauma of the actual story that you're reading, bringing them together.
Yeah.
So maybe there is some unintentional thematic through line there that I would have to think about, but it's interesting now that you mentioned that.
Yeah. Well, and then on the flip side with the clones, we've mentioned that, their love isn't necessarily even existent, in the same way that their originals are. But one of the things I really felt strongly about it and thought was interesting is Molly's clones uh basic, her kind of, I don't know if you would consider it like an evolved morality and or evolved sense of identity, but completely separates herself from Hank's clone, just in terms of like, the expectation of, oh, so I'm you, I'm a mirror of you, and I'm supposed to love this person because that's what you do. But
Hmm.
I'm not only am I my own person, but this person that I'm supposed to be in love with, I don't feel anything for them. And
Hmm.
I have all of your memories and I have all of these things that's telling me that this is what this should be, but yet I don't have any of those feelings of my own.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's for me, it was representative and symbolic of, if people who have been in relationships, unfortunately, there might come a time where you kind of realize I don't love this person anymore. Something has
Hmm.
changed and I don't really know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. Was that something that I mean, again, I don't want to put two words in your mouth in terms of intent, but like, is that how you kind of meant for that to come across?
Yeah, I mean, it just like it felt natural. I think part of my writing process is just like coming up with characters that I like, putting them in a situation that I feel like I understand, like the physical boundaries of at least, and then introducing some dramatic tension and then just like imagining how it plays out, kind of just
Yeah.
like playing like with action figures and not really starting out with this idea of like I have to hit these plot points necessarily, but just being like what would happen with these characters that I feel like I know
Hmm.
if I throw this kink into their relationship. And I think that's a great advantage of basing characters on people that actually exist that you know really well. So I could imagine like, what if this happened to my grandparents? Like, what would that look like, and how would they react?
Yeah.
And I think the thing with the clones and their relationship is that it also comes back to the thing you were saying earlier about how one of the clones falls in love with another character in the story that has physical disfigurement, and it's this idea that like just like in any movie with like a black man and a black woman in a diverse cast, those two characters are going to end up together because they're both black, and like
Right.
that's the way things pair out.
Right.
And in this story, there's like I wanted to kind of twist that a little bit, and I think part of twisting that was that like these clones are clones of people that have been in love and married for 40 years. And like everything says that they should stay in love with each other,
Right.
especially the fact that they both are like disfigured in the exact same way. But one of the things Manuela, who is Molly's clone, says in the story is that like when she looks at Hank as the husband's character's clone, she doesn't see the person she loves because the person she loves is Hank. Like
Yeah.
this clone is like not the same person that she married and fell in love with. So it's this idea that like just because we're in the same physical lot, does that mean that we have no choice other than to be together?
Hmm. Yeah. And I really relate to the ideas, in this book, just in terms of identity, because it's something that I feel like, you know, as we get further and further into this digital age, our identities are becoming more and more fractured, more and more kind of twisted in terms of social constructs. When we're looking at how do we interact with each other physically, how does that change when we interact with each other digitally, on whether it's social media, whether we're texting each other, whether like we're doing now, we're having this video chat. We're kind of having all of these multiple interactions with people through these different avenues where
Mhm.
our personalities and our identities can be manipulated in different ways. I mean, whether you want to create a whole new identity on the internet, whether you want to, you know, go on multiple dates with multiple people and then kind of pretend to be somebody else each time, whether you want to, remain completely anonymous and never
Mhm.
reveal yourself. Um, did how much of the modern digital age did that play into this book? Because again, I know developing it over such a long period of time, and especially how quickly things have changed in terms of our
Mhm.
dependency on technology, and even just in the medical field with a lot of advances being made over there. Was it kind of like a game of whack-a-mole where you're trying to like get on something as soon as you kind of honed in on that, something else came up, you're like, oh, that might be a better fit for my story.
No, not really. And I think the way I got around that was setting the story vaguely in the past. So the story is kind of set in like the 90s
Yeah.
ish. And the reason I wanted to set it in the 90s was because of the reason you just said, like if it's set in the past, then I don't have to worry about updating the technology when like new advancements come out. And also I wanted I wanted the technology in the story to feel limited, and I felt that would add tension and like a horror element to the story. Where
Mhm.
like if it took place today and people are using the most advanced technology in the story, then I felt like it would be a little bit more open ended as to what was possible because like it just seems like there's more possible with regards to especially like cosmetic surgery and stuff like that
Yeah.
now than there was in the 90s. So I was like, if I said it in the 90s, a lot of like most people have a general idea of what the capabilities were for in the medical and biological field. Then versus today, where like if people were using like Minority Report style interfaces and it was like very sci-fi and futuristic looking, then I feel like it'd be way less scary because you might think, well, why don't they just fix it? Because like
Right,
there's
right, right.
like all this technology to fix things. So that's
um
why I did that. And then, well, the other thing is the whole thing about identity and identity politics, and that's something that definitely I did play a little bit of whack-a-mole with that because I wanted it to feel like I said the whole thing with rewriting the third act came from these like evolving notions of identity and representation. Um, and so there's a couple of scenes in the story that really tackle identity and identity politics in a way that people in the 90s probably wouldn't have talked about them.
right.
Like, and there's one scene in particular where Hank and Henry are just kind of like chilling out and having a talk, and Henry starts to interrogate Hank's identification as a black man
Right.
and how much of his identity is based on the ways he differentiates himself from white men. And I think that's something that came from there's so much pride that we all take in like the specifics of our identity. Like when you go on Twitter and people have their username, and then right under their username is a list of all these terms that define who they are.
Right.
And like if you take a step back, you look at those terms, all of those terms are the ways in which these people differ from straight white men.
Right.
And so to like to think about that like this part really wigged me out for a while actually, because I was like, if we take so much pride in defining ourselves, but our identities only exist as a counter to what's considered the standard or the norm, which is the straight white male,
Right.
then how much validity do those identities have? Like if aliens abducted me and abducted Donald Trump Jr. and they were like, and they asked me what I am, I would be like, well, I'm a mixed race man, and they would just be like, you know, like what, like what does that mean? You know what
Right.
I mean? There's like, and I'm like for all intents and purposes, I go through life as a straight white man, so like I'm not the best example. Um, but yeah, it just like was this thing that really wigged me out, and I think there's some of of Henry is the clone. There's some of like my like devil's advocacy feelings that go in Henry. There's kind of like Henry is kind of this guy who's like, He's new black. He's like post-racial. He's like he wants everybody to move beyond race, and he
Right.
wants that because he has the luxury because he doesn't look like a black person. So he can
Right.
actually be like, why can't we move beyond race because of the way he looks? But also there's these. I mean, it gets really complicated. But anyway, that scene was like the one thing that drew a lot from where we are today in terms of identity.
Well, and that scene again was another one that really stood out to me and struck me. And I don't know if you've been watching the show on HBO, Random Acts of Flyness,
Oh yeah,
by
for
Terrence
sure.
Nance. Well, yeah, the last episode they had, I thought was really interesting, just in
I
terms
haven't
of
seen that one yet.
well, I won't spoil too much for it, but there's a part where he speaks kind of to what you're saying in terms of you know, or maybe it was the episode before the last one where I mean he's basically talking about positing and centering around whiteness in terms of
Yeah.
diverse creation, when a lot of the times you're either attempting to um like you're saying, kind of plant your flag and separate yourself and draw attention to your differentness, but that differentness is still in relation to what is considered the norm, which is
Right.
straight white men. So even by trying to, talk around and avoid them, they're still kind of the elephant in the room when
Right.
you're doing a lot of the stuff. But then on the flip side, like to completely ignore a
Right.
lot of that stuff is kind of like, well, then how do you operate? How do you
Right.
fixate? Because I think, the unfortunate truth is that a lot of what uh we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in terms of being minorities and people of color specifically in America is in opposition to what is considered the norm. So when
Right.
you're telling me specifically that, hey, well, race is a social construct, and it's kind of like this is a thing that is it really real? How do you kind of determine race and racism and all that stuff? My counter is, well, it might be a social construct, but it's a social construct in which I live.
Right.
So whether or not I would like to believe that certain things exist or certain ways of seeing things exist, and that is the ideal way, like I still have to, for my own safety, in a lot of cases, be able to perceive myself from the vantage point of those in power, so straight white men, and kind of see how in certain situations I might come across to them, to see how in certain situations even my work might come across to them, and
Mhm.
decide whether or not is that worth it. And I think a lot of the times I've determined I'm not creating work necessarily for them. So, it's something that they will get or not get, which
Mhm.
is what I really appreciate about something like Random Acts of Flyness or
Yeah.
Atlanta, or, a lot of newer work that's coming out where I think it's not necessarily done in accordance with, trying to hold people's hands or kind of explain
Right.
certain cultural things. It's speaking directly to the audience that it's meant to speak to, and everybody else can kind of get a glimpse and kind of get a view in, but it's not being made necessarily for others to kind of say, oh, I see myself in that. It's like, oh, I see something different in that. I see these other people in that. And I think that's again, Black Panther was a huge movie this year, and I think part of the reason was, a whole new group of people were able to say, "Hey, that's me. That's
Yeah.
I can
Yeah,
I
totally.
can
And
relate to
also,
that."
not only that, but also just like everybody was like, "Oh, this is interesting because it's fresh and unique."
Right.
Like especially with like all the other superhero Marvel movies, it's like they're all almost exactly the same. And like all the main characters look exactly the same. I've been one. I don't really do political cartoons very often, but I have this idea for one that I'm totally going to do. And it's going to be like a grid of faces of all the most popular superheroes in their like civilian secret identities. So it's
Mhm.
going to be like Bruce Wayne, Clark Kent, Peter Parker, Tony Stark, Doctor Strange, just like all of the classic characters, just their faces with no clothes or anything. And you'll see when they're all next to each other that they all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing physically about these people that makes them any different. And I think like people get sick of that. Like who wants to see the same thing over and over again? So I think things like Black Panther, they strike a nerve not only because Black people and other marginalized people finally get to see themselves, which is huge. But I think everybody across the board is just like, this is actually interesting because it's
Right.
fresh.
Well, and so tying all that back into this book, how do you what are your hopes in terms of this book reaching a larger and wider audience? Because I think you know again, winning the Dwayne McDuffie Award is huge, and he's somebody who obviously was a fierce proponent for diversity within all mediums, and really worked to kind of make that possible, both on the page but also behind the scenes. And it feels like there's a really strong group of up and coming creators of color working within comics who are coming up and trying to break some ground and do some new things. Do you think, or do you kind of hope that this is a book that, not to put it up there and say this is the tipping point where things kind of like,
Yeah,
change
Upgrade Soul
over,
changed
but
everything.
but but to say, in terms of, Upgrade Soul can be an example of a book that, again, like you were talking about a couple of years ago, nobody wanted this book. Nobody was really biting this book. But now it can be an example, specifically, at a publisher like Line Forge, which is, again, working really hard to, have that diversity both on the page, behind the page, at
Hmm.
editorial, at the publishing level. Can kind of be example of a book that, this not only is critically successful, but also, financially successful, and finds, a home just at a larger level, not just being kind of a niche indie book, but a book that a lot of people look to and say, this is good comics. This is what we
Yeah.
want to see.
Yeah, well, obviously, I would love that, and that's like the fantasy for sure. But I understand the limitations of Upgrade Soul, not only in the pitch, but also just like I said, it's a dense book, and I think it's easy to get into once you get into it. But I was talking to somebody the other day about how Upgrade Soul is kind of like, remember back in the old days of Netflix when it was DVDs,
Yeah.
and like every once in a while you'd be like, you know what, I'm gonna like insert some culture into my life and get this Tarkovsky film that I've been meaning to watch for years. So like you get this DVD of like The Sacrifice, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to watch it. And it gets at your house. You're just like, I'm not really in the mood to watch that right now.
Yeah.
So it sits on top of your TV for like a month because you're never quite in the mood to watch it because you know it's going to be an intense experience. And I feel like, not to, I mean, Tarkovsky is a huge influence. I'm not trying to say Upgrade Soul is at that level, but Upgrade Soul is like that kind of, I think that it's going to be a little bit daunting for some people to get into. I think once you get into it, it's like it's easy to consume, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna. So I think it's got that hurdle. But like I said, I think that's why it's going to be kind of like a slow burn. If it is successful, it's going to hopefully be over time. When people read it, I think people will respond to it and then tell their friends and spread the word. So that's what my fantasy is.
Yeah, my dad, I think, still has Breaking Bad on DVD from Netflix, like in a drawer somewhere, for like the last 6 years.
Oh,
So
he's just been charged
hopefully,
for it.
yeah.
But it's like you own that now.
Yeah, basically, I think that's how it works. At a certain point, it's just like, why would we? I think they're getting rid of DVDs too.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think he does just own it now because there's might not be anywhere to send it back to. Um, well, let's transition a little bit away from Upgrade Soul, because I am curious just in terms of, um, well, actually, no, let's pivot back for a second
Okay.
before we go all the way away.
I'm having a
Because
great time. I can talk about it all day.
yeah, no. One of the things I did want to talk about, though, that I found the most interesting, in this transition and this kind of journey that you've been on with this book, is that uh, it's been made in several different forms. I mean, obviously, you talked about the shorter versions that you've put out, but then also putting it out as a digital comic, that also came with a soundtrack, basically, and music cues that went along with it. What was it like creating something like that? Because I again, I feel like that's something that we're seeing more and more of now, where we're getting more of these digital comics that are playing around with the idea of what a comic book can be, what you can expect from a comic book. But this was not, this was a little while ago when this was going on. So what
Yeah.
was that process like, and what was kind of your vision for that?
Yeah, so that was actually the original vision for Upgrade Soul, was for it to be this interactive iOS app. And I did it in collaboration with a developer named Eric Lawyer. who's just like this amazing visionary developer and coder and interactive artist. And so he had this idea for an interactive comics platform, and we kind of went way back. We like collaborated on some projects before, and I had been struggling to find a home for Upgrade Soul, and I was working on it. I had, illustrated the first chapter, I think, by this point, and Eric had developed this platform, and he asked me if I wanted to adapt Upgrade Soul to this interactive form. And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. It sounds like a terrific challenge, and I don't have any place else to put this comic. So let's try to do this. So we like got really intensive about it. Eric had a ton of amazing, brilliant ideas about how to do comics digitally in a way that honored the form, but also took full advantage of the capabilities of the technology and the devices that we were aiming for. So we came up with all these strategies and philosophies and put out this app in 2012. That was one of the first projects like it. So there was maybe 2 or 3 other projects for iOS that came out around the same time. There's one called Operation Ajax that used some of the same approaches that we use, and maybe 1 or 2 others. But it was really like maybe like less than 12 people were doing stuff like this for iOS. And so by virtue of the novelty and kind of the pioneering aspect of the comic, it became part of the global conversation about the future of comics, which was amazing. And like Eric and I were flown to Europe multiple times to lecture at like international comic festivals and stuff about the future of comics. I distilled a lot of our philosophies down to a manifesto that became the foundation of a digital comics portal called screendiver.com that was developed by this company in Amsterdam called Submarine. It was one of the old school pioneers in digital comics. So we did this thing. It kind of made a big splash. We had a ton of downloads. It was really cool. But the App Store was still kind of finding its footing as far as what people were willing to pay for. So we got about halfway through the app development as far as the populating the chapters. It was a serialized thing. So we launched it with the first chapter for free, and then every few months we'd upload a new chapter, and you could buy it for like $1 or $2. I can't remember what it was. So we got about halfway through, and then we just kind of like petered out on funding because we just weren't getting enough funds. So we put the app on hiatus, and then Apple updated their iOS, and then they left a bunch of apps behind. So it doesn't even run on current iOS devices anymore. So you can only even see it if you have an older device. Luckily, I have a couple, so I can still play with it. And actually, we can talk about this later, but I'm going on tour with Ben in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to be reading from the actual app. So when you see the app, or when you see us read, it's going to be like with full, animated effects and parallax panning and a live audio accompaniment that keeps track of the process. So you'll get to see the app in action. But it was this amazing thing, and like I'm so proud of it. And I actually hadn't looked at it for a long time. And I did our book release this weekend at SO1 Books in LA, and I read a couple of chapters from the app on my old ass iPhone. Just like can't believe it still runs, but I plugged it into the projector, it still runs. I ran the app, and I was like, damn, this thing is really cool. Like I really want people to see this because, like I said, Upgrade Soul is designed for this platform. So. Right. The book version is great, and I think it really holds up, and that extensibility was built into the creation process. So like when I was doing the art, I did everything in layers so we could have this parallax effect, but I'd set up all the pages as standard format comic book pages in Photoshop. So at the end of the day, I could just export flattened files and send them straight to the printer, so there wasn't any translation to be done. But go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I was wondering, is that something that you plan on trying to go back to and tinker with more after the fact, or are you just kind of like, is that a relic for those who still have iPhone 4s?
No, I mean, it's been a really long journey, and I kind of put it on the back burner while I've been working with this publishing stuff to get the book done. There was a lot of work to get the book ready for press and everything. But we have every intention of finishing the app and going back, and so we're talking with Lionforge about that and a couple of other people, and the plan is to have it come out by next summer, because also next summer is the release of the soundtrack. We're putting that out on vinyl. Nice. With this record label called FPE Records, based out of Chicago. They're putting out so the soundtrack was done by this experimental hip hop producer and artist named Alexis Gideon out of Pittsburgh. He's an old friend from Chicago. He's just like, stuff is incredible. You got to check his stuff out. He should totally be a household name. But he did this score that's like kind of inspired by like 70s giallo, like goblin Italian horror kind of stuff, and right. Like it's just like the dopest soundtrack. It's like it stands on its own. So we were planning on putting the album out just as an accompaniment to the book, anyways. So the album is
Mhm.
coming out next summer, but we're gonna try to get the app going again so we can launch it all at the same time.
Nice. All right. Well, another reason to get the book again if you have it in physical format, and the nice little extra.
Yeah,
Think I
exactly.
might might, might go for that too. So yeah, so now we can pivot away slightly from Upgrade Soul, but I do want to ask, now that you kind of have a little bit of room to breathe, you've put it down for a little bit, gonna go back and do the app, but um having gone through this whole journey and this whole process, is this something now where you look to work that you want to do in the future? Do you feel kind of emboldened by kind of finally finishing this project and looking forward to doing new things, or the things that you learned about the way that you work in your creative process from finishing this project, that you kind of feel like now the next thing that you do, not that it won't like take 15 years to finish
Yeah,
it,
that's not
but
gonna happen.
but now that you're kind of like, oh, like I know more of what interests me, what I
Yeah.
feel like is possible, in the comics market, in terms of, creating stories that maybe don't necessarily fit into the mainstream ideals and looks. But I'm still able to get, a lot of these ideas. They don't all have to be necessarily as heady as Upgrade Soul, but
Hmm.
um just moving forward to the next thing. Does it feel like you've got, some momentum going now, or does it kind of feel like
Yeah.
you want to kind of like breathe a little bit before you dive back into stuff?
No, definitely not. I mean, like I said, I was working on a ton of other stuff during the production of Upgrade Slow. So I've got, like I said, I've got scripts ready to go for comic stuff. This one with Ben Passmore is already coming out next summer. So that's done. That was written. Got a couple of other pitches that are going out. So I'm definitely like, I mean, like I said, I've been struggling to get into comics for 15 years. So during that whole time, I've been coming up with pitches and ideas. So like, I've got a utility belt full of stuff that's pretty much ready to go. So like I'm gonna try to keep staggering stuff out for a while, and I feel like, so the fact that I've been rejected for so many years in the
Yeah.
comics industry, I think is like, it's a good thing in a way, because it's allowed me to become so much more confident in my own specific voice, and I feel very confident in the stories I want to tell. And I think, some of my peers who started out at the same time as me ended up like getting hired for Marvel, and they got put on multiple Marvel books and stuff like that. And and looking back, I feel like that's not the career that I would have wanted. Like I would prefer to have the career where like I have more of a like an auteur sensibility. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like I'm doing the stories I want to tell. I'm not doing. Sorry, did you hear that beep?
Yeah. No, no, it's good.
Okay, it happens. There's beeps that come through.
We'll edit and post.
Okay, I'm just gonna close that window so my girlfriend can stop texting me. But anyway, so yeah, I think like it sucks that I didn't get opportunities early in my career, but I think if I had gotten those opportunities, I wouldn't have it as strong and as singular of a voice now, because I
Yeah.
think I would have been forced to compromise so many times throughout my career.
Well, now looking forward, I mean, is that sounds like something that you don't want to do, that you definitely want to, continue to have this uh, unique singular voice. So moving forward, are you looking to do more stuff with Line Forge, do more stuff independently? Or are you just kind of open to whatever comes your way?
Yeah, I mean that, the other thing about being rejected for so long is that I feel no loyalty to the comics industry. So like if other things come along outside of comics, I'm really excited to just like flex my abilities. And like, so I've got a children's book pitch that just went out. I'm doing some audio drama stuff. The thing with the film options for Upgrade Soul and Bottom Feeders, I'm going to be doing some writing for screen.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm just super excited to. Oh, I'm working on a novel that's
Nice.
is going to be one of the next pitches. So yeah, I just want to like try everything and see what fits. I think the reason I got into comics, I originally wanted to get into film. I actually went to art school to be a filmmaker, but I found it easier to communicate through comics, because because it was a non-collaborative medium for me. Like I could just lock
Mhm.
myself in my room and draw and write the story and come out 6 months later with something finished and put it in all the bookstores in town and everybody could see it. It just was like a more efficient way to communicate. Um, but if I had the means, I would totally love to explore other mediums.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's the opposite reason I got into comics is because I wanted a collaborative thing that I could kind of settle down and work on with other people.
uh,
Uh, yeah. So I guess let's kind of wrap things up on the reverse way that I usually start things, which is I want to know your favorite uh comic book couple, and I want to know your least favorite comic book couple. So the one that you love the most and the one that you can't stand.
oh man, I wish you had pre-warned me about this question. Are you talking about romantic couple or?
You can take the question however you want. I mean, romantic couple, I think is where a lot of people's minds go to. But if you want to do, platonic couples or kind of couples that hate each other but are often together.
Oh man. Well, the first couple I thought about was uh, Enid and I forget the other character's name in Ghost World as like
Yeah, yeah.
a friendship that I think about a lot, and those characters are kind of a big inspiration for the book I did with Ben. Um, but as far as non-platonic couples, I would I don't have any good answers off the top of my head. I'm like going through my all-time favorite books. You know, another platonic relationship that like was super moving to me and very formative in my early days getting into comics was, and I don't remember the characters' names in this book either, but Kings in Disguise by
Okay.
I can't even remember the names of the guys who did it, but that's a book that was put out by I think Slave Labor in the early 90s. That's like such a good book, and the two main characters in that story are so well written and like have such a great dynamic. I don't know, man.
It's all good. I feel like, yeah, if nothing comes to mind, I feel like that is the answer.
Yeah, totally. Comics is not a medium that excels in great love relationships.
Is there a reason for that, do you think?
I don't no, I was saying that in jest. I didn't mean to like diss on all comics that have love relationships. But I mean there is something about comics in general though. I think that's like it's a medium that is it's a medium and an industry that's great because the stakes are so low.
Mhm.
Um, so like it's a great medium to experiment and you get all these like really singular voices because like I said, people can just do it in their room by themselves and put this stuff out. And nobody in comics has really any expectations or intentions of getting rich. Like nobody gets into comics because they want to get rich.
Right.
So everybody's doing it for the love of the craft. And so I think you get like a lot of like really great like I said, like really singular voices in this medium. But I think because there's no money in the industry, like certain people that excel as writers or whatever often just get cherry picked by film and TV. So
Mhm.
like at Cartoon Network, like if you go to Cartoon Network offices, it's like a who's who of like the hottest indie comic stars from the
Right.
past 10 years. Because like anybody who's done something that like, excelled, they just got picked away. And like if
Mhm.
Cartoon Network is offering you like the salary that's beyond your wildest
Right.
expectations, then why would you continue to make comics where you're doing it like only for I mean there's lots of reasons to continue making the comics, but when you're doing it only for the love of the craft, especially if you've been doing it for the love of the craft for 15, 20 years, it's like I want to get paid a little
Right.
bit. So I think
Yeah. No.
it's tough for comics to keep like the top talent because the industry doesn't do a good job of of keeping people fed, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I think again when we look to, more diverse voices, it's not easy for them to break in. So I feel like a lot of the times when
Right.
they do the work, and it may get recognized, like you're saying, in other mediums, animation might recognize it, film might recognize it, television might recognize it. There's really no reason to not jump over there and see, what that money's like because it's good money.
Right.
But also, somebody's opening the door for you and you're kind of like,
Right.
all right, let's walk through this one and see what happens.
Totally.
Um yeah, I feel like, comics is weird just in terms of the way that relationships get portrayed because one, if you go back throughout the history of comics, they were again written by a lot of straight white men, but
Mhm.
also at a time when it was a lot of questionable things were happening in the 40s, 50s,
Right,
60s, and you look back at those books and you're kind of like, ooh, that didn't end
right,
well. um, but also, it can be difficult sometimes, I think, especially if you're working on that monthly schedule to kind of put in that level of depth and nuance that I think a lot of
right,
people can easily pick out in a relationship because, when your whole situation relies on just, almost reality TV-esque drama of,
right.
these two people kind of bickering and going back and forth and like that's not really a relationship. I feel like, there's a lot more to you know, people whatever that was I heard it in the background.
Oh, motorcycle.
Yeah, but no, I mean, again, reading Upgrade Soul, you can tell that a lot of time and effort was put into making sure those relationships are identifiable
Right,
and read a certain way. Whereas, if you're just kind of, chugging along on, the latest, superhero book, it might just kind
right,
of be like, well, these people are in a relationship because they've been in a relationship for 75 years and we're not going to change it now. So
right. Totally.
keep
Yeah.
keep going that way. But
Yeah, and I think also there is something about like for however a good upgrade soul is, I think it's only as good as it is because I was able to spend so much time on it and like hone it and layer it and all these things. And I think if, like I said, if I had taken the path of getting picked up by Marvel and being put on 5 monthly books, like there's no way that me personally, if I was working on 5 monthly books at any single time, there's no way that any one of those books would be done to the level of polish that I was able to put into Upgrade Soul because I had so much time.
right.
So I feel like, yeah, going back a little bit, like what I wanted to be the guy who does all these things and like has a bunch of stuff and my name's on a bunch of stuff, but like I'm not spending more than like a month on each script. Um, and I don't think would have wanted that.
Well, your name's going to be on a bunch of stuff now, and and congratulations again to you on that. Let everybody know where they can see you. Again, you've got a book tour coming up. Let everybody know where they can find you on social media, and let everybody know what you've got coming up work wise again, so they can be on the lookout for that.
Okay, cool. So you can find me on social media. I'm at Ezra C. Daniels on everything. Um, the next thing coming out is, like I said, this book. It's a horror comedy that I wrote. It was drawn by the amazing white hot Ben Passmore. Ben and I are going on tour starting on October 2nd, and I'm going to rifle through all the stops that we're going to make, all the cities we're going to stop.
Okay.
So we're starting in Philadelphia. We go to New York Comic Con, then we go to Pittsburgh, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, Omaha, Sioux City, Iowa, my hometown, Denver, Salt Lake City, San Francisco, Oakland, Portland, Seattle, and then Los Angeles. And then we're doing a stop, hopefully, in Riverside, California.
Oof, that is a tour.
Yep, we're doing it.
So definitely be on the lookout if I'll post a link to the dates so people can be on the lookout for that. But yeah, if Ezra and Ben are coming through your town, be sure to check it out. Check out that cool interactive Upgrade Soul
Yeah, if you got
reading
an
because
old ass iPad or iPhone.
yeah, because that sounds like a really awesome thing to see. And thank you so much again for coming on and talking with us.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out and having me on. It was super fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. Catch you next week.